Welcome to another episode of True Crime Cases. Today, we have a shocking case for you, filled with twists and turns that stunned the investigators involved. February 23, 1991. Dan Willoughby, a devoted father, is driving back with his kids to the family's vacation beach house. The children's faces are glowing with the excitement of their recent trip to the museum, eager to share their adventures with their mother, Trish. Upon entering their home, his 10-year-old daughter rushes ahead of her siblings, bounding into the bedroom to tell her mother all about their day. But the excitement comes to a screeching halt as she stumbles upon a scene that will be etched into her memory forever. Trish Willoughby, a loving mother, lay unconscious on the bed. The room bore the signs of a violent struggle. Trish had been brutally attacked, stabbed, bludgeoned, and strangled. A butter knife was stuck to her temple, a chilling aftermath of the violence she had endured. Her head was wrapped with a bloody towel, a sight that would haunt her family forever. The children were in shock, their cries echoing through the once peaceful beach house. Despite her horrific wounds, Trish was still alive, moaning in pain. The happy family vacation had turned into a living nightmare. A doctor nearby hurried to help. There was little aid he could provide to the profusely bleeding woman. In an ambulance, Trish was rushed to the hospital, where she unfortunately succumbed to her wounds. Dan grievingly informed the authorities, who were now on the scene, that $400 and Trish's 2 valuable rings were missing from the condo. The crime scene was a mess, with drawers pulled out as if someone was desperately searching for something. The police were ill-equipped and ill-prepared to handle such a case. They took 7 Polaroid pictures and sealed the scene, promising to investigate it later. Police questioned the hotel staff, who told them there was a suspicious character lurking near the beach house that afternoon. They also questioned Dan, who was frantic and sobbing, and said they were a happily married couple on their family vacation. The police had no further questions. In the wake of the heart-rending incident, a distraught Dan implored the Mexican authorities to permit him to transport Trish's remains back to the States for a dignified funeral. The authorities, concerned about the negative publicity they would receive if news leaked out, especially one of rich foreign tourists meeting brutal ends in Mexico, if consented to have Trish's remains returned with her family to Arizona. Notably, no autopsy was conducted, a procedure that would have been mandatory in a similar situation had an incident like this occurred on American soil. The news of Trish's murder sent shockwaves through their community back in Phoenix, Arizona. Trish was a successful businesswoman, running a lucrative herbal supplement company with her mother. She was known as a perfect person, untainted, always appearing happy and never discussing her problems with others. She was loved by everyone, everywhere she went. Trish's body had barely arrived back when local authorities started receiving numerous phone calls, people claiming foul play was involved, and not just a horrible coincidence. It appears Dan was a man of contradictions. To his community, he was a straight-laced, church-going, faithful Mormon husband. He was known for his generosity, often helping around the neighborhood, and even bringing homeless people home for dinners. But looking a little deeper, a different picture of Dan emerged. As the investigation continued, the police began to uncover more about Dan's double life. His colleagues revealed that Dan was a party animal who loved to drink alcohol, a behavior considered very un-Mormon-like and against his outwardly image. He was often absent from work, spending his time and business expenses meeting clients, or, according to his colleagues, on a woman called Yesenia, under the guise that she was a customer. There was even a joke going around the office. Dan would be seen freshening up in the bathroom, come out smelling of strong cologne, and then breeze through the office, stating he was off to see a client. However, everyone knew he was really going away to spend time with Yesenia Patino. The police now were curious to know who was this mystery woman. Enter Yesenia Patino, a young and exotic woman who had moved to Arizona with her family at the age of 6. She had a wild life, drifting from bar to bar, man to man. She met Dan in late 1989, when she was waiting for a bus, and he pulled over in his flashy Jaguar. He flirted with her, jokingly scolding her for littering, as she dropped a candy wrapper on the ground. He offered her a lift and handed her his business card, playfully suggesting a holiday trip and drinks. It seemed Yesenia had found the type of man she was always looking for, a man eager to spoil her, take her to expensive places, and lavish her with attention. Dan had persuaded his wife that he required Spanish lessons to better navigate his business prospects in Mexico, of course. Subsequently, he even presented Yesenia to his wife and children as his Spanish tutor. Soon after, he also started taking frequent trips to Mexico, bringing Yesenia along. Yesenia was described as strikingly beautiful, with a fiercely passionate personality. Perhaps it was this passion that fueled their relationship. Dan even kept a photo of Yesenia displayed in his office with the words, "To my future husband, Dan Willoughby," written on it. It is unknown if at the time his wife suspected anything about the nature of their relationship, or if her strong sense of morality and faith prevented her from viewing her husband unfavorably. For those acquainted with him, Dan's relationship with Yesenia was hardly a well-guarded secret. He was quick to brag about his attractive new Spanish tutor, even boasting that she was, quote, "amazing in bed." In a mere span of weeks, Yesenia's world underwent a dramatic change. Dan arranged an apartment for her, in close proximity to his residence. He persuaded Trish that it's their moral duty to cover her rent. But as the saying goes, what happens in the dark comes to light. Dan's lavish lifestyle and absences from work eventually caught up with him, and he was fired from his job. Dan Willoughby, once a respected figure in his community, was now solely reliant on Trish's income. Despite losing his job, Dan continued to live a life of luxury, all while maintaining Yesenia as his Spanish teacher. His frequent absences and lavish lifestyle, funded by Trish's income, began to sow seeds of resentment within the family. The once happy home was now filled with tension and uncertainty. Trish, who had been supporting the family single-handedly, was growing increasingly worried about Dan's unexplained absences. Her concerns were shared by her mother, who began to suspect that something was very wrong. Dan frequently dropped off the kids at school and spent the rest of the day at Yesenia's apartment, undoubtedly practicing more than just Spanish. Trish grew increasingly uncomfortable as she could not reach Dan throughout the day, despite the fact he was no longer working. She spoke to her mother, who advised her to speak to Dan. In the fall of 1990, Trish's suspicions reached a boiling point. She decided to confront the situation head-on and went looking for Dan at Yesenia's apartment. What she discovered there changed everything. The front door was unlocked. She walked straight in and found Dan in Yesenia's bedroom, hastily putting on his shirt. Yesenia, hearing Trish's voice entering the apartment, immediately hid. The confrontation was inevitable, and Dan knew it. After a short argument, Trish, still in shock, stormed out, with Dan trying to catch up. Dan spoke to Yesenia, asking her to deny everything if Trish speaks to her, and to insist that she is just his Spanish teacher. The next day, Trish confronted Yesenia at the public pool area of the apartment complex. The conversation escalated, and voices were raised, but Yesenia denied any romantic involvement with Dan. She even offered to stop tutoring Dan if it was causing problems in their marriage. But the truth was far from this. Yesenia and Dan continued to see each other, lying to Trish about their relationship. Fast forward to March 1st, 1991. The investigators brought Dan in for questioning. During their interrogation, the detectives delicately broached the subject of the large fortune that Dan would inherit from Trish's thriving business and her life insurance policies. A question that, under normal circumstances, might have been met with a simple answer. But not this time. Dan's reaction was anything but ordinary. His face flushed, his demeanor shifted, and he became noticeably rattled. He shot back with a question of his own, his voice laced with a mix of fear and indignation. Am I being considered a suspect here? His sudden defensiveness, his agitation, it was like a siren going off in the investigators' minds. It was a big red flag. Meanwhile, the police are also searching for Yesenia. They visit her apartment, but find movers and packers, suspecting that she was planning to flee the country. They track her down to a hotel near the airport, just before she was scheduled to take a flight. Searching through Yesenia's belongings, they discover a social security card belonging to an Alfredo Pinto, a man charged with prostitution in Oregon. So, who is Alfredo Pinto? Yesenia then revealed she was, or rather is, Mr. Pinto. Yesenia Patino Gonzalez was born male and had even been wedded to a man named Jack, who also funded her gender reassignment surgery after their marriage. This left investigators even more puzzled because there was no same-sex marriage back then, neither in Mexico nor in USA. With the revelation of these intricate details about Dan, Trish, and Yesenia, the investigators found themselves intrigued and eager to delve deeper into the case. During questioning, Yesenia denied being involved in any plot against Trish. She admitted to being in Mexico partying with friends the weekend Trish was murdered, but claimed she wasn't aware Dan was there. When confronted about Trish's rings that were found in her wallet, she claimed she got them from a man on the beach. Completely unfazed by these accusations, Yesenia appeared calm and was even flirting with the detective. At one point, she leans into him and says, "Detective, I know what a man wants." Due to a lack of evidence against her at the time, the police used an existing shoplifting warrant to put her in jail. When Dan was later questioned about Yesenia's gender at birth, he claimed to be completely unaware of her transgender identity. He claimed she had no visible Adam's apple or a deep voice, and she was all woman. Considering the intimate nature of their relationship, this revelation left the investigators stunned. One of them even stated, quote, "You just can't make this stuff up. The truth is far crazier than fiction." Searching for more evidence, the police exhumed Trish's body to conduct an autopsy. The coroner found a bruise on Trish's abdomen and evidence that she had been struck in the head 9 times. She had also been stabbed in the head with a butter knife, and there was ecchymosis, a type of bruising on her body that was compatible with a wound from a right-handed fist. On March 4, 1991, in a joint effort with Mexican authorities, a team of forensic specialists from the USA was granted access to the beach house, where it all originally went down. The team uncovered compelling evidence implicating Yesenia. Her fingerprints were found all over the crime scene, especially on the back door and a soda bottle left there. However, there was no direct forensic evidence discovered against Dan Willoughby. By the time the forensics and autopsy results are released, Yesenia had already been discharged from jail and had fled to Mexico. The police, in cross-country cooperation, searched for her everywhere, and with the help of media exposure, finally had a lead. In December 1991, someone had reported having seen Yesenia working at a bar in Mexico and had called Crime Stoppers. She was arrested in a crowded cantina in Mazatlan and agreed to cooperate with the Arizona police. Yesenia was presented with a proposal. If she agreed to be extradited to the USA and testify against Dan in his trial, she would receive a reduced sentence. She accepted this offer. April 1992, the trial of Dan Willoughby unfolded. A chilling plot began to emerge from the shadows. Yesenia, the Spanish teacher turned lover, took the stand, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. She testified that Dan had spoken about killing his wife on multiple occasions, her words painting a horrifying picture of premeditation. Dan had discussed buying a firearm silencer in Mexico, drowning Trish while scuba diving, or pushing her off a cliff at the Grand Canyon. The courtroom gasped as Yesenia recounted a dinner at a restaurant in May 1990, where Dan chillingly declared, "I think I will take her to Mexico and get rid of her." He even talked about having his mafia connections kill her. Yesenia disclosed that Dan had held discussions with Trish and her mother about the future of their business in the event of one of their passings. He persuaded them to agree to a buyout arrangement funded by insurance. Trish was covered by multiple insurance policies, including an astounding $750,000 policy, acquired just a few months before her untimely demise. Yesenia revealed that 3 months before the incident, Dan started to meticulously devise his dark scheme. He confided in her that he wanted the satisfaction of killing Trish himself and gave Yesenia specific instructions on her role. She was to come in after he leaves, mess up the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, tie a rope around Trish's neck, and attack her body with a knife, then take off with some valuables and money. To prepare for his sinister plan, Dan rented a condo in Rocky Point, somewhat removed from others in the area, and paid in cash. He and Yesenia made 2 trips from Phoenix to Rocky Point Beach to explore the area and go over their plans. Dan arranged for Yesenia's brother to take her to the beach on the day of the crime. On the afternoon that their sinister plot was executed, Dan met Yesenia and her brother on the beach. After a short chat about their plans, Dan returned to the condo. Yesenia left her brother at a park and drove to a spot with a view of the condo. After Dan and the children drove off to the museum, it was her cue to enter the condo through the unlocked back door. Taking a knife from the kitchen, Yesenia went to the bedroom and saw Trish lying unconscious on the bed, soaking in her own blood. Trish was still breathing, each breath making the gurgling sound. Following Dan's plan, Yesenia stabbed and strangled Trish but was unable to kill her. After taking Trish's rings and money and scattering the contents of Trish's purse, Yesenia fled, meeting her brother for the return trip to Arizona. Following the tragic event, Dan initiated a series of actions to divert suspicion. He instructed Yesenia to depart Arizona, leading her to return to Mexico. He convened a gathering of his neighbors, where he refuted any involvement in the incident and discouraged them from engaging with the police. Dan also went to great lengths to cover his tracks. He told Yesenia's brother to deceive the police by denying he met him in Mexico. He warned Yesenia's husband, Jack, to stay uninvolved. He contacted his travel agent, asking to erase trip details from the agency's computer system. Dan also asked his former secretary to vouch for his character as a devoted family man, should the police come asking questions. He even instructed her to intimidate a former colleague to prevent them from revealing any information about Yesenia to the police. At the time, Dan had provided false information to investigators, claiming that condo guards had spotted 3 individuals of Native American descent in a black pickup truck in the vicinity. It was revealed that Dan was able to claim an older life insurance policy for his wife, but couldn't collect on the policy purchased for the larger buyout agreement between Trish and her mother. Investigators also uncovered a shocking detail on the day of the incident. Statements from his own children revealed that just after leaving the condo, Dan asked them to wait in the car, claiming he had forgotten his passport and would be back in 5 minutes. He stayed in the condo for about 15 minutes, during which his oldest daughter, who wanted to know what was taking her father so long, tried to enter but could not because the front door was locked. It's speculated that this is the time Dan carried out his attack on Trish, and it lined up with Yesenia's testimony. He was next seen by the kids exiting the front door, tucking in a new shirt. During the investigation, the Mexican government cooperated with Arizona officials by allowing them to interview Yesenia and also giving temporary custody of her, so she could testify at Dan's trial. In return for her cooperation, Arizona State agreed not to prosecute Yesenia and to try to have her sentence in Mexico reduced. However, when Yesenia was charged by the Mexican authorities and she pleaded guilty, she received the maximum sentence possible: life in prison. Back in Arizona, the grand jury indicted Dan for premeditated first-degree murder and several other offenses, such as armed robbery, obstructing a criminal investigation, filing a fraudulent insurance claim, etc. Considering everything presented at the trial and jury's indictment on all counts, the judge handed down the maximum sentence. Dan was sentenced to death. However, 3 years after the initial trial, in September 1995, Yesenia wrote a letter to the American judge, claiming that she alone was responsible for Trish's demise and that Dan was innocent. Reviewing the forensics of the case, the blood forensics told a different story. 2 distinct types of blood splatters were found on the sheets at the crime scene, suggesting that the victim was attacked twice within around 10 minutes, corroborating Yesenia's first confession. She did not act alone and entered the condo after Dan had already attacked Trish. November 1999, Dan's conviction was overturned, and the death penalty was taken off the table. In the second trial, prosecutors gave him 2 consecutive life sentences. Dan maintains his innocence to this day. The case of Dan Willoughby is a chilling reminder of the depths to which human beings can sink when driven by greed and jealousy. Dan had it all: a loving family, a thriving career, financial success, and a great future. Yet he threw it away chasing his dark temptations and caused profound suffering to the one he swore to love and protect. Indeed, Trish's final moments were tragically marked by suffering at the hands of those she had generously provided for. Despite her kindness and support, she was betrayed by the very people she cared for. This stark reality serves as a sobering reminder of the depths of human betrayal. Yet, in remembering Trish, we must honor her strength, resilience, and unwavering faith. May she rest in peace. The story of Trish, Dan, and Yesenia serves us as a grim reminder of the dark side of human nature. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, as we have many more shocking cases to uncover. Thanks for your support.